A stranger gave me his kidney. My best friend didn't even call. When the doctor said one of my kidneys had failed, I didn't panic. I just laughed. That dry, nervous kind of laugh people make when life hits one more time than it should. He said I'd need a transplant soon. I nodded, pretending I understood, pretending I had people who'd care. That night, I called my best friend, Ethan. We've been inseparable since school, brothers without the blood. I told him everything, voice shaking between jokes I didn't mean. Man, I might need a kidney. I laughed weakly. Silence on the other end. Then he said, "Damn, that's rough, bro. Hope you find someone." He hung up 5 minutes later. I stared at the screen until it went dark. He didn't call again. Days turned into weeks. Everyone had excuses. Work's crazy. Hospitals scare me. You'll be fine, right? I wasn't fine. I was falling apart quietly, pretending to be strong because that's what people expect. The nights were the worst. Machines beeping, the taste of metal in my mouth, nurses whispering outside the curtain like I wasn't there. Then one morning, the nurse said someone had signed up to be tested as a donor. I didn't even bother asking who. Probably a mistake. But a week later, she smiled and said, "He's a match." When they brought him in, I froze. He wasn't family. He wasn't a friend, just a man who looked tired but kind. "I'm David," he said. "We met once. I fixed your car last year. You tipped me more than I deserved. You said I owe you one. Guess I'm collecting." I didn't know what to say. I told him he didn't have to do this. He shrugged. Maybe not, but someone should. The surgery happened a month later. I remember waking up to pain, confusion, and a note on my bedside table in messy handwriting. "You don't owe me anything. Just promise me you'll live like it was worth it." David recovered quickly. He left before I was discharged. I learned to live with the guilt of accepting such a gift from a stranger. Then, 1 year later, Ethan finally reached out wanting to meet. He apologized for disappearing, said he was ashamed he couldn't help. We met at a bar, and after a few drinks he started laughing. He told me the truth. David didn't find me by coincidence. Ethan had hired him, paid him to donate, because Ethan couldn't risk the surgery affecting his new job, his new life. He bought my survival like a transaction, and now he wanted me to know he owned that piece of me forever. I sat there, numb, while he kept talking. Then, he said the worst part. David had complications after the surgery, infections the hospital hid, and he died 6 months ago because Ethan refused to pay for his aftercare. The glass in my hand shattered. I didn't realize I was squeezing it until I felt the sting. Beer and blood mixed on the sticky bar table. Ethan was still talking, still laughing about how clever he'd been, about how he'd structured the payment so David couldn't come after him legally, about how David had called him 17 times those last few weeks. I didn't make a decision to move. My body just did it. 1 second I was sitting there bleeding, the next I had Ethan by his collar, dragging him across the table. Glasses crashed. Someone screamed. His face went from smug to terrified as I slammed him against the wall. "You let him die," I said. My voice didn't sound like mine. "You let the man who saved my life die because you didn't want to pay a hospital bill." Ethan's hands clawed at mine. He was trying to say something, but I wasn't listening anymore. I could see David's handwriting in my head. That note, promising I didn't owe him anything. Meanwhile, this piece of garbage had turned his sacrifice into a business deal and let him rot. Security pulled me off before I could do real damage. 2 guys in black shirts, arms like tree trunks, hauling me backward while Ethan collapsed to the floor coughing. The bar had gone silent except for someone's phone playing a pop song nobody had bothered to pause. Everyone was staring. Ethan stayed on the ground longer than necessary, making a show of it. When he finally stood up, he had this calculated look in his eyes that I recognized from 1,000 poker games. He was already planning his next move. The cop showed up 12 minutes later. I was sitting at a corner table with a bartender pressing bar napkins against my bleeding hand. Ethan was at the other end, surrounded by concerned strangers, his shirt torn, a red mark on his neck where I'd grabbed him. He told them I'd attacked him out of nowhere. Said he just wanted to catch up with an old friend and I'd gone psycho on him. Didn't mention David. Didn't mention the confession. Just painted himself as the victim of some random assault. I tried to explain. Told them about David, about the kidney, about what Ethan had just admitted. But the cops looked at me like I was making excuses. One of them, a younger guy with a military haircut, kept asking why I'd wait a year to get violent if all this had really happened. They arrested me right there, handcuffs biting into my wrists while Ethan watched with fake concern plastered on his face. The whole bar had their phones out recording. Perfect. The holding cell smelled like piss and disinfectant mixed with something sharper, maybe bleach, maybe vomit. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, flickering every few seconds like they were having seizures. I spent the night on a metal bench that was bolted to the concrete floor. too narrow to lie down properly, next to a guy who wouldn't stop muttering about the government tracking him through his dental fillings. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw David's face, not from the hospital, but from the auto shop. It had been a Saturday morning, early spring, when I'd taken my car in for an oil change and brake check. The place had been nearly empty, just David and one other mechanic working in the back. He'd had grease under his fingernails and a genuine smile when I'd pulled in. Most mechanics gave you that suspicious look, like they were already calculating how much they could overcharge you. David just looked friendly, genuinely interested in helping. The brake pads needed replacing, he'd told me. Nothing urgent, but in the next month or so. The oil change was standard. He'd finished the job in 40 minutes, charged me exactly what the board said it should cost. No hidden fees, no suddenly discovered problems. When I'd handed him a $50 tip for a $20 job, he'd tried to refuse it. "That's too much, man. I just did what you paid for." But I'd insisted. "You did good work," I'd told him. "You were honest with me. That's worth something. Keep it." And he'd looked at me with these grateful eyes and said that thing about owing me one. Just a throwaway comment. Normal human kindness. The kind of thing people say in casual moments and forget 5 minutes later. Except he hadn't forgotten. 13 months later, when some asshole hospital coordinator had put out a call for kidney donors and mentioned my name, David had remembered, had volunteered, had submitted to testing, had gone through with the entire surgery. All because of a $50 tip and basic human decency. And it had killed him. I must have fallen asleep at some point because I woke up to a guard banging on the bars. Sunrise was leaking through a window somewhere down the hall. My back screamed from the metal bench. My hand throbbed where I'd cut it on the glass. The guy next to me was still muttering, now about fluoride in the water supply. They processed me out around 8 in the morning. No charges filed. Ethan had generously decided not to press assault charges. The officer who handed me my belongings, wallet, keys, phone, told me I was lucky. Lucky, I repeated. Yeah, real lucky. He gave me a look that said he'd seen 1,000 guys like me come through, and not one of them thought they were at fault. "You got one free pass," he said. "Next time you lay hands on someone, you won't walk out." I didn't bother responding, just signed the paperwork and left. Outside, the morning was disgustingly beautiful. Clear sky, birds singing, people going about their normal Saturday routines like the world hadn't just revealed itself to be fundamentally broken. My car was still at the bar. I called an Uber and spent the 15-minute ride staring out the window, trying to process what had happened in the last 12 hours. Ethan had bought David's kidney, had paid him to donate, had structured it as a business transaction with clauses and limitations and an expiration date on responsibility. And when David got sick, when the organ Ethan had purchased started causing complications, Ethan had just walked away, left him to die alone, and broken calling for help that never came. The Uber driver tried to make small talk about the weather. I grunted responses until he gave up and turned on the radio. My car was the only one still in the bar parking lot. The bartender must have called me Toad, but apparently my beat-up sedan wasn't worth the effort. I sat in the driver's seat for 10 minutes before starting the engine. My phone was blowing up. Texts, missed calls, voicemails. I scrolled through them numbly. Mutual friends asking what happened. Former co-workers who'd seen the video. My boss with 3 calls marked urgent. My mom, who I hadn't talked to in 6 months, suddenly concerned about whether I was okay. And buried in all of it, one text from a number I didn't recognize. "You're going to pay for what you did. This isn't over." No name, just the threat. I stared at it for a long time, then deleted it and blocked the number. I drove home on autopilot, made it inside my apartment without seeing anyone, locked the door, threw the deadbolt, put a chair under the handle like that would actually stop someone who wanted in. Then I stood in my kitchen and tried to figure out what to do next. The apartment felt wrong, too quiet, too normal, like the walls should have been screaming with the weight of what I'd learned. I'd been living here for 3 years, ever since the transplant and recovery. It was a decent place, 2nd floor of an old building, hardwood floors that creaked, radiators that clanked, windows that looked out on a street where nothing much happened. Before last night, it had felt like home. Now it felt like a stage set, fake, temporary. I walked through each room like I was seeing them for the first time. The living room with its secondhand couch and TV I barely watched. The bedroom with sheets that needed washing, and a closet full of clothes I'd bought because they were on sale, not because I particularly liked them. The bathroom with its dripping faucet I kept meaning to fix. David had died in a place like this. Some shitty apartment where the landlord probably didn't fix things either. Alone. In pain. Waiting for help that never came. I ended up in the shower, sitting on the floor with water running over me until it went cold. Then I just sat in the cold water because getting up seemed like too much effort. My phone rang. I'd left it on the counter. It rang and eventually stopped, then started again. Finally, I got out, wrapped a towel around myself and checked the phone. My boss. Again. I called her back. "James," she said, relief flooding her voice. "I've been trying to reach you all morning. Are you okay?" "I'm fine," I said. It was a lie, but what else was I going to say? I saw the video. Everyone saw the video. "James, what happened?" "I attacked someone at a bar," I said flatly. "That's what happened." There was a long pause. "I need you to tell me this isn't going to affect your work." "I don't know," I said. Honest answer. Another pause. "Take the week off. Paid. Get your head together. We'll talk next Monday about where things stand." She hung up before I could respond. I should have felt grateful. Instead, I just felt numb. The weekend stretched out ahead of me like a prison sentence. Nowhere to go. Nothing to do. Just me and my thoughts and the growing realization that everything I'd believed about my survival was based on a lie. I'd thought David donated out of kindness. Pure, simple human kindness. Turns out he'd done it for money, because he was desperate, and Ethan had exploited that desperation. It didn't make the gift less valuable. Some rational part of my brain tried to argue he'd still given me a kidney. Still saved my life, but it felt different, tainted somehow. And the worst part was knowing that David had tried to reach out for help, and I'd been completely oblivious. I'd been recovering, getting back to normal life, while the man who'd saved me was dying because he couldn't afford $300 worth of antibiotics. $300. I had spent more than that on celebration dinners after I'd recovered, had taken friends out to nice restaurants, bought rounds of drinks, splurged on things I didn't need because I was so grateful to be alive. And David had been drowning in medical debt, calling a man who'd promised to help him and getting nothing but rejection and lies. I spent Saturday in a haze, didn't eat, didn't sleep, just sat on my couch refreshing social media and watching the bar fight video get shared and reshared. The comments were split. Half thought I was justified, the other half thought I was unstable and dangerous. Nobody knew the full story except me and Ethan. And Ethan was already controlling the narrative, painting himself as the concerned friend who'd tried to help an old buddy who'd gone crazy. By Sunday afternoon, I couldn't take it anymore. I started digging. If David had died from complications, there had to be records somewhere. Death certificates were public in most states. Hospital records might be sealed, but surely something was accessible. I started with Google, searched David's full name, which I'd learned from the hospital paperwork, plus the city, plus keywords like death, infection, kidney donor. Got nothing except my own case mentioned in a few local news articles from when the surgery had happened. Local mechanic donates kidney to stranger. Feel-good story of the month. I tried the county records office website. You could request death certificates online, but you had to be family or have legal standing. I was neither. I tried calling the hospital where we'd both had surgery. Got transferred 6 times before someone in administration finally told me they couldn't discuss patient information, even deceased patient information. Even when I explained that I was the recipient and had a right to know what happened to my donor. "Privacy laws," she said in a voice that suggested she'd said this 1,000 times before. "I'm sorry, but there's nothing I can do." Every avenue was a dead end, and with each dead end, I felt more trapped, more helpless. This was probably how David had felt, trying to get help and hitting walls everywhere. That thought made me so angry I put my fist through my drywall. Then I had to sit there bleeding again, from knuckles this time instead of palm, wondering what the hell I was doing. Sunday night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Sleep seemed impossible. My brain was cycling through everything on repeat. The bar conversation, Ethan's laugh, David's text messages begging for help. Around 3 in the morning, my phone lit up with a new message. Unknown number again. I almost deleted it without reading, but something made me open it. "I'm David's sister. Can we talk?" I sat up so fast I got dizzy. Stared at the message like it might disappear if I looked away. "Who is this?" I typed back. 3 dots appeared immediately. She was awake too, apparently, waiting for my response. "My name is Fiona. I saw the video of you fighting that guy. Someone tagged me because they knew David donated a kidney last year. I need to know what happened." I called her. Didn't even think about it. Just hit the call button and held my breath. She answered on the first ring. "Hello?" Her voice was young, uncertain, scared maybe. "This is James," I said. "The guy from the video. The one who got your brother's kidney. I know who you are," she said. "I just need to know what that fight was about. Why you attacked someone." So I told her. All of it. Ethan's confession about paying David. About it being a transaction. About refusing to cover aftercare and medical costs. About David dying 6 months ago because of it. She was quiet for so long I thought the call had dropped. "Fiona? He told you David died 6 months ago?" Her voice cracked. "Yes." "That's not possible." "What do you mean?" "David died 14 months ago. Not 6 months ago. 14 months. My turn to be quiet. Ethan had lied even about that. Of course he had. Where did he die? I asked. What hospital? He wasn't in a hospital at the end, Fiona said. He died at home. His landlord found him 3 days later. 3 days. The coroner said it was complications from an infection. That sometimes these things happen and there's nothing anyone can do. Made it sound like it was just bad luck, random chance. But it wasn't random, I said. He tried to get help. He couldn't afford the medication. She started crying. Quiet, heartbroken sounds that made my chest hurt. I didn't know, she said. I didn't know he was sick. We weren't super close, but he would have called me if he needed help. Why didn't he call me? Maybe he didn't want to burden you. Maybe he was ashamed. Maybe he thought Ethan would help and just kept waiting for help that never came. We stayed on the phone for 2 hours. She told me about David, about their childhood, their parents who'd both died when they were young, the way they drifted apart as adults but still cared about each other. She told me about finding his apartment, how empty it had been, how there were medical bills stacked on his kitchen counter, collections notices, final warnings from creditors. He was trying to pay them, she said. I found a notebook where he'd written out a plan, how much he owed, how much he could pay each month. He was trying so hard, but he couldn't keep up, I said. No, the bills were too much, and without someone to help he just… She didn't finish the sentence. When we finally hung up, the sun was starting to rise. Monday morning, time to face another week, another day of living with this weight. But at least now I wasn't alone in it. Fiona knew the truth too, and together, maybe we could do something about it. They let me out the next morning. No charges filed. Ethan had decided not to press anything, the officer told me, like he was doing me some huge favor. I walked out into harsh sunlight with dried blood still under my fingernails and a citation for disturbing the peace. My phone had 43 messages. Most were from people who'd seen the bar fight video already circulating online. A few were from mutual friends asking what the hell happened. 3 were from my boss asking if I was okay and if I needed time off. Nothing from Ethan. I went home to my empty apartment and stood in the shower until the water ran cold. The cut on my hand had stopped bleeding, but it was going to scar. Good, I wanted the reminder. For 2 days, I did nothing. Called in sick to work. Didn't answer my phone. Just sat on my couch staring at walls and trying to figure out what to do with the rage burning in my chest. Then on day 3, Ethan made his next move. The messages started appearing on social media. Friends of friends, people from our old college crew, even some of my co-workers, all asking if I was okay, if I was getting help, if they should be worried about me. Took me a few hours to piece together what was happening. Ethan was telling anyone who'd listen that I'd become unstable, that he was concerned for my mental health, that the kidney transplant had changed me somehow, made me paranoid and violent. He was good at it too. Never said anything directly actionable, just implied things. Shared his concerns, asked people to check on me. Classic manipulation dressed up as caring. My boss called me in for a meeting. We need to talk about what happened at the bar, she said. Her office had that fake, calm energy of someone who'd been coached by HR. I told her the truth, all of it. She listened with her hands folded on the desk, her face neutral. When I finished, she asked if I had any proof. Proof of what? I said. Any of it. The payment, the arrangement, David's death. I didn't. Just Ethan's confession in a loud bar where nobody else had heard the details. She told me to take 2 weeks off, paid. Think of it as a mental health break, she said, and I could hear the unspoken concern in her voice. She thought I was cracking up too. That night I started digging. If David had died from complications, there had to be records. Death certificate, hospital records, something. But every search came up empty or locked behind privacy walls. I tried the county records office. The clerk, a tired woman with reading glasses on a chain, told me I'd need to be family to access death certificates. When I explained I was trying to find information about someone who'd saved my life, she gave me a sympathetic look and repeated the policy. I tried calling the hospital where we'd had our surgeries. Got transferred 6 times before someone finally told me they couldn't discuss patient information. Even about deceased patients. Even about donors. Dead end after dead end. I was sitting in my car outside the hospital, head against the steering wheel, when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. Is this the guy from the bar fight? A woman's voice. Young, uncertain. Who is this? My name is Fiona. I'm David's sister. Everything stopped. The parking lot, the traffic noise, my heartbeat, all of it just stopped. I saw the video, she continued, of you fighting that guy. Someone posted it on Facebook and my friend tagged me because she knew David had donated a kidney last year. She thought I might want to know there was drama about it. I found my voice. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry about David. She was quiet for a second. Can we meet? We met at a coffee shop in a strip mall 40 minutes from my place. Somewhere neutral. Somewhere neither of us had history with. Fiona was younger than I expected. Mid-20s maybe. with David's same gentle eyes and the same way of holding herself like she was taking up too much space. She had a folder with her, the kind you get at office supply stores. It was worn at the edges like she'd been carrying it a while. "I want to know what happened to my brother," she said before I could even sit down. "Nobody will tell me anything. The hospital says it was complications from the donation surgery, but they won't give me details. His landlord found him 3 days after he died. 3 days, and nobody called me until he was already gone. I told her everything, the whole story. My kidney failure, David's unexpected donation, the surgery, the recovery, then the hard part. Ethan's confession about paying David, about it being a transaction, about refusing to cover the aftercare." She listened without interrupting, her hands wrapped around a coffee cup she hadn't touched. When I finished, she was crying silently, tears just running down her face while she stared at the table. "I knew something was wrong," she finally said. "David and I weren't super close, but he would have told me if someone had actually hired him for that. He was working 2 jobs trying to pay off Mom's funeral costs. If someone had offered him money to donate a kidney, he would have mentioned it. Unless he was ashamed," I said. "Or unless someone made him sign something that said he couldn't talk about it." She opened the folder. Inside were medical bills, collection notices, letters from the hospital billing department, all addressed to David, all dated after the surgery. "He never told me he was having problems," Fiona said. "I found all this stuff in his apartment after. The landlord gave me a box of his things. These were in a drawer by his bed. The bills were staggering. $40,000 for treatment of post-surgical infection, another $20,000 for emergency room visits. Collection notices threatening legal action. The dates told the story. The infection had started 3 weeks after the donation surgery. The bills showed David had sought treatment, had tried to manage it, had been prescribed antibiotics that he'd apparently never filled because there was an unpaid pharmacy bill for $1,200. The last ER visit was 2 days before he died." "Did the hospital tell you any of this?" I asked. Fiona shook her head. "They said he died of natural complications. That sometimes infections happen and there's nothing anyone can do. They made it sound like it was just bad luck." "This wasn't bad luck," I said. "This was neglect." She looked at me with something fierce in her eyes. "I want to sue them. The hospital, whoever paid David, all of them. But I don't have money for a lawyer and I don't even know where to start." "I know someone," I said, "and I'll pay for it." That's how we ended up in the office of Patricia Vance, attorney at law, 2 days later. She was a friend of my uncle's, someone who'd helped him with a workers' comp case years ago. She listened to our story, looked through Fiona's documents, and leaned back in her chair with a grim expression. "This is bad," she said, "but it's going to be hard to prove. We've got the bills," I said. "We've got the timeline. We've got circumstantial evidence. What we need is direct evidence that someone was responsible for paying David's medical costs and then failed to do so. Do you have any kind of contract? Any written agreement?" I didn't. Ethan had been careful about that. Everything had been verbal, untraceable. "What about the hospital records?" Fiona asked. "Can't we get those?" Patricia nodded. "We can try. I'll file a motion. But hospital records for donation procedures are tricky. There's a lot of privacy protection, especially around living donors. They're going to fight us on releasing anything. So we're stuck?" I said. "Not stuck," Patricia corrected. "Just at the beginning. Let me make some calls, file some paperwork, see what we can shake loose. In the meantime, you two need to document everything. Every conversation, every message, anything that might be relevant." We left her office with a plan, but no guarantees. Fiona seemed deflated, smaller somehow than when we'd walked in. "I thought this would be easier," she said in the parking lot. "I thought someone would care that my brother died." "I care," I told her, "and we're not giving up." But that night, lying in bed, I wondered if I was making promises I couldn't keep. The first break came 3 weeks later. Patricia called me at work, told me to come to her office immediately. When I got there, Fiona was already waiting with the same worn folder and a new expression on her face. Hope, maybe, or anger, hard to tell. "The hospital fought the records request," Patricia said without preamble. "Fought it hard. Too hard, actually. Made me suspicious. So I filed a secondary request for any documentation of financial arrangements related to David's donation." "And?" I asked. "And they sealed those too," she said. "Claimed patient privacy, confidentiality agreements, the whole 9 yards, which tells me there's something there worth hiding." "Can they do that?" Fiona asked. "They can try," Patricia said. "But here's the thing. When hospitals seal records this aggressively, it usually means they're worried about liability. So I reached out to some contacts, people who work in hospital administration, and asked some very careful questions." She pulled out a thin file of her own. "Turns out your hospital has had issues before. 3 years ago, a liver donor developed complications and sued. The case was settled quietly. Sealed records, NDA for everyone involved. But the fact that it happened is public record. So they have a pattern, I said. Possibly. Which makes them vulnerable. So I suggested to their legal department that perhaps they'd like to avoid another lawsuit by being cooperative. Gave them a week to respond. Did they? Fiona was leaning forward now. They sent me this, Patricia said, sliding a single sheet of paper across the desk. It was a letter from the hospital's legal counsel. Brief, formal, and utterly infuriating. It stated that David's medical complications were unfortunate but not negligent, that all proper procedures had been followed, and that the hospital had no legal liability in his death. This is garbage, I said. It's a starting position, Patricia corrected. They're hoping we'll go away, which means we need a second opinion. She'd already arranged it. A medical examiner, retired, who reviewed donor complication cases as an independent consultant. His name was Dr. Raymond Shaw, and he agreed to look at what limited information we had. Dr. Shaw worked out of a small office that smelled like old books and hand sanitizer. He was maybe 70, with steel gray hair and the kind of steady hands that made you trust him immediately. Show me everything, he said. We laid it out. The bills, the timeline, the ER visits, the prescriptions that were never filled. Patricia had managed to get David's death certificate, which listed cause of death as septic shock secondary to post-surgical infection. Dr. Shaw studied it all in silence for maybe 20 minutes. Then he looked up at us with barely contained anger. This was preventable, he said flatly. Completely, entirely preventable. The infection David developed is common after kidney donation. Not frequent, but common enough that we have standard treatment protocols. Antibiotics, monitoring, follow-up care. If caught early, survival rate is nearly 100%. But David didn't get that care, Fiona said. According to these bills, he tried. He went to the ER twice. The first time they gave him antibiotics, standard prescription, but he never filled it. The second time, a week later, the infection had progressed. They admitted him overnight, gave him IV antibiotics, released him with another prescription and instructions for follow-up. The pharmacy bills, I said. He couldn't afford them. Dr. Shaw nodded. The second prescription was even more expensive than the first, nearly $1,200 without insurance. And by the time he came back to the ER the third time, it was too late. The infection had spread to his bloodstream. Septic shock is very difficult to reverse once it reaches that stage. So if someone had just paid for his medication, I said, he'd be alive. Almost certainly yes. The room went quiet. Fiona was crying again, quiet tears that she didn't bother wiping away. Patricia was taking notes with sharp, angry strokes of her pen. Will you testify to this? Patricia asked Dr. Shaw. Absolutely, he said. This kind of preventable death makes a mockery of the donation system. If there's something I can do to hold someone accountable, I'll do it. We filed the wrongful death lawsuit 2 weeks later, named the hospital, named John Doe for the person who'd arranged David's payment, and laid out our case. Medical negligence, breach of contract, wrongful death. The hospital's response came fast. They denied everything, claimed David's complications were unrelated to the donation, said he'd failed to follow medical advice, and demanded the case be dismissed. Patricia had expected this. Now comes the discovery process, she told us. We request documents, they request documents, and somewhere in all that paperwork we find the truth, but we didn't need to wait that long. The local news picked up the story 3 days after we filed. Someone, probably a clerk at the courthouse, had leaked the filing to a reporter who'd covered medical malpractice cases before. The headline read, "Local man dies after kidney donation, sister claims negligence." It wasn't a big story at first, just a few paragraphs in the local section, but it mentioned Ethan by implication without naming him. The unnamed beneficiary who'd arranged payment for a donor and then allegedly abandoned him. That was enough. By the next morning, my phone was ringing off the hook. Reporters wanting comments, friends asking if it was true, and one call that changed everything. Unknown number again. I almost didn't answer. Is this about the kidney donor who died? A man's voice this time. Nervous. I saw the story. Who is this? My name is Terrence. Ethan paid me to keep quiet about something, but after reading this, I think you should know. We met at a McDonald's. Public, cameras everywhere, witnesses. I wasn't taking chances after everything that had happened. Terrence was maybe 40, wearing a construction company shirt with his name embroidered on the pocket. He had the look of a guy who'd seen some things and wasn't impressed by much anymore. 5 years ago, he told me, Ethan hired me to do some work on a rental property he owned. Under the table, cash payment, nothing official. While I was there, I found some documents he'd left out, contracts with people for various services, all of them sketchy. What kind of services? I asked. One was a woman who'd agreed to be a surrogate for Ethan's cousin, except the contract had clauses that basically made her an indentured servant for 9 months. Another was a guy who'd sold Ethan his car for way under value because Ethan had convinced him it was worthless and then flipped it for triple. Ethan collects desperate people, Terrence said. Finds them when they need money, makes deals that look good up front, then screws them over with the fine print. I confronted him about it and he paid me 10 grand to forget what I'd seen. Why are you telling me this now? Because that story mentioned someone dying. If Ethan's deals are killing people now, that's different. I got kids. I don't want that on my conscience. He had proof. Photos of documents he'd taken before accepting Ethan's hush money. Insurance policies, contracts, agreements, a whole portfolio of exploitation. Patricia almost kissed him when we showed her. This is exactly what we need, she said. This establishes a pattern of behavior. Predatory contracts, targeting vulnerable people, abandoning them once he gets what he wants. We filed an amended complaint, adding the new evidence. This time, we named Ethan directly. The lawsuit hit him like a freight train. His job, some fancy consulting position at a tech startup, put him on immediate leave pending investigation. His social media went dark. Mutual friends started reaching out to me asking what was happening. Had I really accused Ethan of letting someone die? I told them all the same thing. Ask him yourself. But nobody wanted to be associated with it. One by one, people who'd been Ethan's friends for years started distancing themselves. The evidence was too damning, the optics too bad. Then Ethan struck back. First, the anonymous accounts started. Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, all posting the same things. My home address, my workplace, details about my medical history, my kidney transplant. Claims that I was bitter and making false accusations because I couldn't handle that Ethan had moved on with his life. Then came the death threats. Most were empty internet tough guys, but some were specific enough to be scary. People who thought I was lying about David's death to get money. People who thought I was trying to destroy Ethan's life out of jealousy. I reported them all, but nothing happened. The accounts would get banned and new ones would pop up the next day. Patricia suggested I move temporarily. Get away from the address that was plastered all over the internet. I refused at first, stubbornness maybe, but then someone broke into my apartment. I came home from work to find my door forced open, the frame splintered. Inside was chaos. Furniture overturned, dishes smashed, clothes pulled out and shredded. My laptop destroyed, screen cracked, hard drive yanked out. Papers everywhere, including all my medical records that I'd kept in a file cabinet. They'd spray-painted the walls. Liar in big red letters across my living room. Fraud in my bedroom. The police came, took a report, dusted for prints, found Ethan's. Partial thumbprint on my bathroom mirror, probably from when he'd smashed it. But when they went to question him, Ethan had an alibi. 15 friends swearing he'd been at a poker game all night. The detective, an older woman who looked perpetually tired, told me they couldn't charge him without more evidence. Even though it's his print? I asked. He could have left that print any time he'd been in your apartment before, she said. Without proof he was here during the break-in, we've got nothing. So he just gets away with it? She gave me a long look. I didn't say that. I said we need more evidence. Keep reporting things. Keep documenting. Eventually he'll slip up. I moved out the next day. Stayed with my uncle for 2 weeks while I found a new place across town. Didn't tell anyone the address except Patricia and Fiona. Meanwhile, Fiona was doing her own digging. She'd started going through David's old emails, his social media, anything she could find. That's when she discovered the others. There were 3 of them, people who'd posted online about deals they'd made with someone who'd screwed them over. None mentioned Ethan by name, but the details matched. A woman who'd sold him jewelry at a low price after he'd convinced her it was fake. A man who'd done graphic design work and never got paid. A college student who'd signed a contract to test an app that ended up harvesting all her personal data. Fiona tracked them down one by one. Convincing them to talk wasn't easy. They'd all signed NDAs, all been threatened with legal action if they spoke out. But when they heard about David, about how the same pattern had led to someone's death, they started to crack. The woman with the jewelry was named Corinne. She'd been going through a divorce, desperate for cash. Ethan had bought her grandmother's necklace for $300, told her it was costume jewelry. He'd sold it to a dealer 2 weeks later for $8,000. I looked it up afterward. She told us over a shaky video call. When I realized what he'd done, I tried to sue him. But the contract I'd signed said I agreed it was costume jewelry and that the sale was as is. My lawyer said I didn't have a case. The graphic designer was Maxwell. Ethan had hired him to create a logo and branding package, promised $2,000 on completion. When Maxwell delivered the work, Ethan suddenly had a list of problems with it. Said it wasn't what he'd asked for, refused to pay. Maxwell spent 4 months fighting it before giving up. I was a broke recent grad, Maxwell said. I couldn't afford a lawyer. He knew that. He counted on that. The college student, Gia, had the worst story. Ethan's app had collected her location data, her contacts, her browsing history. Within a month of downloading it, she'd started getting targeted scam calls and emails. When she'd confronted Ethan, he'd threatened to sue her for breach of contract if she said anything publicly. "I was 20 years old," she said. "I believed him. I thought I'd go to jail or something." Patricia brought them all together for a deposition. 4 victims, 4 different schemes, all following the same basic pattern. Find someone desperate. Make a deal that seems beneficial. Use fine print and manipulation to take advantage, then threaten them into silence if they complain. The pattern was clear enough that even the hospital's lawyers started to sweat. Their whole defense had been that David's death was unrelated to any contract. But with evidence showing Ethan had a history of exactly this kind of predatory behavior, their case started falling apart. Then the medical examiner's official report came back. Dr. Shah had done a thorough review of the limited information available, and his conclusions were damning. Based on the documentation provided, it is my medical opinion that David's death was directly attributable to untreated post-surgical infection, a known and manageable complication of kidney donation. Standard treatment protocols, if followed, would have resulted in full recovery, with probability exceeding 95%. The failure to receive necessary medication due to financial constraints represents a clear breakdown in the continuum of care that should have been provided to a living donor. Furthermore, the timeline suggests that David sought appropriate medical attention on multiple occasions, demonstrating his understanding of the severity of his condition. The barrier to treatment was purely financial. Had financial support been available, as would be standard in a properly structured donation arrangement, this death would not have occurred. In my professional opinion, this case represents gross negligence in the duty of care owed to a living organ donor. Patricia filed it with the court the same day. The judge, an older man who'd been looking increasingly annoyed with the hospital's lawyers, read it in silence. "This is compelling," he finally said. "Defense, do you have any response?" The hospital's lawyer stood up, shuffled some papers, sat back down. "We'd like to request a continuance to review this report thoroughly, Your Honor." "Denied," the judge said. "You've had ample time. Let's move forward." That's when everything started to accelerate. The trial date was set for 8 weeks out. Both sides entered the discovery phase, which meant depositions, document requests, and a whole lot of legal back and forth that I barely understood. But I understood this: Ethan was starting to crack. His lawyers, a fancy firm from the city that probably cost more per hour than I made in a day, filed motion after motion trying to get the case dismissed. They argued there was no direct contract between Ethan and David, that any financial arrangement was verbal and thus unenforceable, that David had assumed all risks when he'd volunteered to donate. Patricia shot down every single argument. The texts came next. Fiona had kept digging through David's phone records, which the police had returned to her after closing their investigation into his death. She found text messages between David and a number that wasn't saved in his contacts. The messages started 3 days after David's surgery. Simple at first. "Unknown number. How are you feeling?" "David. Sore, but okay. Thanks for checking in." "Unknown number. Let me know if you need anything." Then, 2 weeks later, when the infection would have been starting, David. "Hey, I'm having some pain and fever. Doctor said I need antibiotics, but they're expensive. Can you help?" Unknown number. "How much?" David. $347 for the prescription." Unknown number. "That's a lot. Can you use a generic?" David. "This is the generic. Please, I really need this." Unknown number. "I'll think about it." Then nothing. No response. David sent 3 more messages over the next week, each more desperate than the last. David. "I'm getting worse. Please, I need help." David. "The pain is really bad now. Can you just loan me the money? I'll pay you back." David. "Please answer me. I'm scared." All unread, or read and ignored. Then, after David had gone to the ER the second time, David. "I'm in the hospital. They said the infection is spreading. I need IV antibiotics, and they want me to follow up with a specialist. I don't have insurance for this. You promised you'd take care of medical costs." Unknown number. "I paid for the surgery. Anything after that is on you. Read the agreement." David. "What agreement? We didn't sign anything." Unknown number. "Then you've got no proof I promised anything. Stop contacting me." That was the last message. 5 days later, David was dead. Fiona had taken those text records to a digital forensics expert, someone Patricia knew. The expert traced the unknown number through cell tower records and phone company databases. It belonged to a burner phone purchased at a Walmart 40 miles from Ethan's house. The purchase was caught on security camera. The buyer had paid cash and worn a baseball cap, but the car in the parking lot was registered to Ethan. "Got him," Patricia said when she saw the report. The trial started on a Tuesday morning in September. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, wood-paneled and formal. with that particular smell of old buildings and stress. Ethan showed up in a suit that probably cost more than my rent, flanked by his lawyers. He didn't look at me once during the entire first day. The prosecution, which was really Patricia representing Fiona as the plaintiff in the wrongful death suit, laid out the timeline. David's donation, the complications, the text messages, the refused payments, the death. Ethan's lawyers countered that there was no written contract, no legal obligation, just a verbal agreement that had been fulfilled when the surgery was paid for. The jury, 7 men and 5 women, looked confused by all the legal terminology. But they perked up when Dr. Shaw took the stand. He explained, in clear, simple language, exactly how David had died. The infection, the treatment protocols, the cost of medication that would have saved his life. Could this death have been prevented? Patricia asked. Absolutely, Dr. Shaw said. The antibiotics David needed cost less than $400. For that amount, a man who'd saved someone's life could have been saved himself. Several jurors were taking notes. One woman in the back row was wiping her eyes. Ethan's lawyer stood up for cross-examination. He tried to suggest that David might not have followed medical instructions, that he might have had other health issues that contributed to his death. Dr. Shaw shut him down immediately. The medical records are clear. David sought treatment appropriately. The only barrier was financial. Had the necessary medication been provided, survival was virtually certain. The lawyer sat down, looking frustrated. Next came the character witnesses. Terrence testified about Ethan's pattern of exploiting desperate people. Corinne, Maxwell, and Gia all took the stand to describe their experiences. By the third day of testimony, Ethan's face had gone from confident to pale. His lawyers kept whispering to him during breaks, probably telling him how badly things were going. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for. Ethan took the stand in his own defense. His lawyer walked him through the story carefully. How he'd wanted to help an old friend who was sick, how he'd found David through a referral service, not true, and arranged a private donation agreement. How he'd paid for the surgery and thought his obligation was complete. "And did you have any agreement to pay for post-surgical care?" his lawyer asked. "No," Ethan said smoothly. "The arrangement was specifically for the surgical procedure. David was made aware of this." "Did you receive any requests from David for financial assistance after the surgery?" Ethan hesitated just a fraction of a second. "I may have received a message or two, but we had no agreement for me to pay his medical bills." Patricia stood up for cross-examination. She had that particular energy lawyers get when they're about to destroy someone. "Mr. Ethan," she said, "you testified that David was aware your financial obligation ended with the surgery. Is that correct?" "Yes." "Can you show the court any documentation of this agreement?" "We didn't have formal documentation. It was a verbal agreement." "I see," Patricia said. "So we only have your word that David understood and agreed to this limitation?" "That's correct." Patricia pulled out the text messages. "Let me read you something." She went through them one by one, David's increasingly desperate pleas, Ethan's dismissive responses. "Does this sound like someone who understood he was on his own for medical costs?" "He was trying to get more money out of me," Ethan said. "That's different from our original agreement." "Our original agreement," Patricia repeated. "But you just said there was no formal documentation. So how can you be certain what the original agreement included or didn't include?" Ethan's lawyer objected, but the judge overruled it. "I know what we discussed," Ethan said, his voice rising slightly. "Do you?" Patricia asked. "Because these text messages show David referencing a promise you made to cover medical costs. Your response was to tell him to read an agreement that apparently doesn't exist." "The agreement was verbal," Ethan insisted. "How convenient," Patricia said. "A verbal agreement that only you remember, that can't be verified, that conveniently absolves you of any responsibility for a man's death." "Objection," Ethan's lawyer jumped up. "Argumentative." "Sustained," the judge said, but he looked at Ethan with barely concealed disgust. Patricia wasn't done. "Let me ask you directly, Mr. Ethan. When David texted you saying he was scared and needed help, why didn't you respond?" "I had no obligation to respond." "No legal obligation, perhaps. But morally, this was a man who'd given you a piece of his body to save your friend's life. Doesn't that deserve at least a response?" "I didn't know how serious it was," Ethan said. "He told you he was in the hospital. He told you the infection was spreading. How much more serious does it need to be?" Ethan didn't have an answer for that. The final nail came from the financial records. Patricia had subpoenaed Ethan's bank accounts and credit card statements. She showed the jury that in the same week, David was begging for help with a $300 prescription. Ethan had spent $2,000 on a watch. "You had the money," Patricia said quietly. "You just chose not to help." The jury deliberated for 7 hours. When they came back, the forewoman read the verdict in a steady voice. "On the charge of wrongful death, we find the defendant liable Fiona grabbed my hand. She was shaking. The judge asked about damages. The jury had awarded $2 million. $1 million for David's pain and suffering, $1 million in punitive damages for Ethan's gross negligence and willful disregard for human life. Ethan's face went white. His lawyer immediately stood up, announcing they'd appeal. "You have that right," the judge said, "but I'm going to tell you something off the record." He looked directly at Ethan. "I've been on this bench for 23 years. I've seen a lot of terrible behavior. But what you did, buying someone's kidney like a commodity and then leaving them to die, that's a new low. I hope you never sleep well again." The courtroom was silent. Ethan and his lawyers filed the appeal the next week. The legal process that followed was long and tedious. Motions, counter-motions, briefs, oral arguments. It dragged on for 13 months. During that time, Ethan's life fell apart in slow motion. His job fired him. The company released a statement saying they couldn't employ someone who'd been found liable for wrongful death. His parents, who'd been wealthy enough to fund his lifestyle, cut him off after seeing the evidence presented in court. His friends abandoned him one by one. The media attention didn't help. The case had gotten picked up by national outlets. The story of the man who bought a kidney donor and let him die was too sensational to ignore. Ethan tried to do interviews defending himself, but each one made things worse. He came across as arrogant, unrepentant, unable to understand why people were so upset. Meanwhile, the harassment against me intensified. Someone had posted my new address online. I came home one day to find my car keyed, all 4 tires slashed. The words liar and fraud scratched into the paint. I moved again. 3rd apartment in 18 months. I was running out of places to hide. The death threats got more specific. People who knew my schedule, who described what I was wearing when I left for work. Patricia suggested I go to the police, but what could they do? Track down anonymous accounts that were probably routed through VPNs in other countries? Then someone found my medical history, my transplant records, my current health status, everything. Posted it all online with comments about how I was ungrateful, how I didn't deserve David's kidney, how I should give it back. Give it back. Like that was possible. Like I could just return the organ that was keeping me alive. I started having panic attacks. Real ones, the kind where you can't breathe and your vision goes blurry. I'd be at work and suddenly I'd be back in that bar, hearing Ethan laugh about owning a piece of me forever. My doctor prescribed anxiety medication. My therapist suggested we meet twice a week. I felt like I was losing my grip on everything. That's when things got really bad. I started having kidney problems again. Pain in my lower back, fatigue, nausea. At first I thought it was stress. But when it didn't go away after a week, I went to see my nephrologist. She ran tests. Blood work, ultrasound, the whole battery. When she called me back into her office, her expression was carefully neutral. "Your kidney function is declining," she said. "Not catastrophically, but enough to be concerned about." "Why?" I asked. "What's causing it?" She pulled up my charts on her computer. "It could be rejection. Sometimes the body decides months or years later that it doesn't want the foreign organ. Could be the stress you've been under. Cortisol levels affect everything, including kidney function. Could be genetic incompatibility we didn't catch the first time. Can you fix it? We can try medication first, immunosuppressants, steroids, but if it continues to decline," she trailed off. "I'll need another transplant," I finished. She nodded. "You'd be put on the list, but I have to be honest with you. Recipients who've already had one transplant are lower priority. The organs go to first-time recipients when possible, so I wait and hope." Essentially, yes. I walked out of her office in a daze. David had died to give me this kidney, and now it was failing. The cosmic joke of it was almost funny. That night, I made the mistake of Googling my own name. The top result was an article about the appeal in Ethan's case. The comments section was a nightmare. People saying I was faking my new kidney problems for sympathy. People saying I deserved it for destroying Ethan's life. People saying David probably wanted his kidney back from someone so ungrateful. I closed my laptop and sat in the dark for a long time. The appeal process finally concluded 16 months after the original verdict. The appeals court upheld the jury's decision. Ethan was liable. The $2 million judgment stood. His lawyers immediately filed for bankruptcy on his behalf, claimed he didn't have assets to pay the judgment. Patricia had anticipated this and had frozen his accounts earlier, but there were legal ways around it if you had expensive enough lawyers, which Ethan apparently still did, somehow. The bankruptcy filing triggered another investigation, this time into Ethan's finances. Where was he getting money for these lawyers? How was he paying his rent, buying food, living his life when he claimed to be broke? The answer, it turned out, was his parents. They'd been funneling him money through a shell company, claiming it was payment for consulting services. When that was discovered, they got pulled into the legal mess too. Now, Ethan wasn't just fighting a wrongful death judgment. He was fighting fraud charges. Patricia actually laughed when she told me, "These people never know when to quit," she said. "They could have just paid the judgment and moved on. Instead, they committed fraud to avoid it, and now they're looking at criminal charges." The fraud investigation took another 6 months. During that time, I went through 2 more medication adjustments for my failing kidney. Nothing was working. My function kept dropping. My nephrologist finally said what we both knew was coming. "You need to be listed for another transplant." The paperwork was extensive. Medical history, psychological evaluation, financial assessment. The transplant coordinator, a woman named Shirley with kind eyes and no-nonsense attitude, walked me through it. "I have to tell you," she said, "your case is complicated. You've had 1 transplant already, which moves you down the priority list. And with your medical history and the ongoing legal situation making headlines, some donor families might be hesitant." "What does that mean?" "It means you might be waiting a long time. And you need to be prepared for that." I signed the forms anyway. What choice did I have? The fundraiser was Fiona's idea. She'd been following my medical situation with increasing worry. When she heard I was listed for another transplant, she immediately started a GoFundMe. I tried to stop her. I didn't want people's pity. Didn't want to be that guy asking for money on the internet. "This isn't pity," she said firmly. "David gave you his kidney because someone should. Well, now someone should help you again. And that someone is me, and anyone else who wants to contribute." The fundraiser went up on a Tuesday morning. Within 24 hours, it had raised $30,000. Within a week, it was at $150,000. Complete strangers donating money to help me get a second chance at life. The comments on the fundraiser were overwhelming. "David sounds like he was a good man. Here's hoping you get another miracle. My brother needed a transplant last year. I know how scary this is. Praying for you. Ethan is trash. Don't let him win. Fight for your life." I cried, reading them. Ugly, grateful tears while sitting alone in my apartment. Then Ethan struck again. He'd been monitoring the fundraiser, apparently, looking for any opportunity to hurt me. When it crossed the $100,000 mark, he posted on social media claiming I was running a scam. "He doesn't even need another transplant," Ethan wrote. "He's making up medical problems to get sympathy donations. I've seen his recent photos and he looks fine. This is just another way to milk money out of the situation." The post got shared hundreds of times. People started demanding proof that I actually needed another transplant. The GoFundMe comment section filled with accusations. Patricia filed a cease and desist immediately. Ethan's post was defamation, provably false, and interfering with my medical care. But the damage was done. The fundraiser stalled. Some people requested their donations back. Fiona spent hours responding to comments with medical documentation proving my condition was real. It was exhausting. I was exhausted. Then the fundraiser hit $180,000, and someone flagged it to GoFundMe administration, claiming it violated their terms of service. The entire fundraiser got frozen pending an investigation. Fiona was livid. She spent 3 days on the phone with GoFundMe support, sending them medical records, letters from my doctors, proof that every cent was going to legitimate medical expenses. They finally reinstated it, but we'd lost momentum. The fundraiser ended up at $182,000. Enough to help with costs, but not enough to cover everything a transplant would require. Still, it was more than I'd ever expected. More than I deserved, probably. I was 6 months into waiting for a transplant when I got the call. Shirley, the transplant coordinator, her voice excited. "We have a possible match," she said. "The donor family has agreed to proceed. Can you get to the hospital in the next 2 hours?" I don't remember the drive. 1 minute I was in my apartment. The next I was in a pre-op room getting prepped for surgery. The donor was a young woman who died in a car accident. Her family had made the decision to donate her organs, and through some miracle of tissue typing and logistics, her kidney was a match for me. I was being wheeled into surgery when Shirley came running down the hall. "Stop," she called to the orderlies. "Stop!" They pulled up short. I tried to sit up, but the pre-op medication was already making everything fuzzy. "What's wrong?" I managed to ask. "The donor family," Shirley said, looking stricken. "They just got a call. Someone contacted them with information about you. About your legal case. About David. About everything. They're asking questions." My heart sank. "And?" I said. "And they're reconsidering. They want 24 hours to think about it." The orderlies wheeled me back to a regular room. The medication wore off slowly, leaving me nauseous and shaky. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, knowing exactly who'd contacted the donor family. Patricia confirmed it the next day. Ethan had somehow gotten their contact information, probably through the hospital's donor network database, which was supposed to be confidential, and called them personally. "He told them you were a fraud," Patricia said. "That you'd lied about David's death to get money. That you were manipulating the system for sympathy. He even sent them screenshots of negative comments from the GoFundMe. And they believed him? They're grieving parents who just lost their daughter. Someone they don't know called them with shocking information about the person who's supposed to receive their daughter's kidney. So yes, they're taking it seriously. The donor family ultimately decided not to proceed. The kidney went to the next person on the list. I stayed in the hospital overnight for observation and was discharged the next morning with appointment cards for follow-up appointments I wasn't sure I'd live to keep. Ethan had taken my second chance and crushed it, and there wasn't a damn thing I could do about it. The hospital filed a complaint about the breach of confidential information. An investigation was launched into how Ethan had gotten the donor family's contact information. It didn't matter. The damage was done. I went back on the waiting list, back to square one. My kidney function continued to decline. I started dialysis 3 times a week, 4-hour sessions hooked up to a machine that did the work my body couldn't do anymore. It was exhausting, debilitating, and I had no idea how long I'd have to do it. Months? Years? The rest of my life? Fiona visited me during dialysis sessions, sat in the chair next to me and told me stories about David to keep my mind off the machine. He used to rescue injured animals when we were kids, she said once. Birds with broken wings, cats with hurt paws. He'd nurse them back to health in our garage. Mom used to complain about the smell. She smiled at the memory. But he was so gentle with them, so patient. That's who he was. Someone who helped things that were broken.